when the organizers asked me to speak about water systems, difficult to frame the work that one has done over 38 years into a 15-minute presentation, so I've taken the indulgence of the next 5 minutes. But this will go like a thunderstorm. There are many photographs and many ideas to be discussed. I also must mention that my colleague Ayushi is here, so if there's any tough questions, she's the hydrogeologist. She answers the technical part of it. I do the general spokesperson kind of a thing. And of course, the work that is being presented is not ours from Biome Trust, the trust that I represent, but that of many people who've been involved as part of the solution. So no credit for us. We've been the nudgers of the solutions and the understanders of the big picture. So I call this social hydrological because my work with water as an engineer started as hydrological systems. Over years, I've learned that water is actually a social construct. And within social construct, I also include the ecological or environmental construct. And that's how we look at social, environmental, and then hydrological or functional. Yeah. So it talks about local water and used water. And used water is a terminology that we're using increasingly for sewage or wastewater. Now it's called used water. Make it less pejorative. And where do I push this? Yeah, I'm pressing the green one. So towards the screen. There you go. No, not towards the screen. No, they're desperately, there you go. So as I said, complex social ecological systems cannot be easily understood, predicted or controlled, right? So understanding is first and then prediction or control comes later. And water is actually a complex socio-ecological system because if climate change is about carbon in the atmosphere, its impact is directly on the hydrological cycle. It's water which is impacted the most, and therefore we have to deal with water in an adaptive sense with the kind of communities that we work with in the area of Bangalore in South India. And therefore, a more agile approach, adaptive approach is required because otherwise, in the technical field, we design for 20-25 years horizon and put in place infrastructure for that 20-25 years horizon. That simply is not sufficient in this day and age. One of the things with local waters or traditional waters in the areas that one works in is that the system called the lakes or the tank ecosystem is a feudal construct. It came during era of aristocracy and that kind of a feudal order. Now, when it transitions to a democratic context, the way of engagement with water becomes very different. And the second transition is also from rural to peri-urban to urban. In the city of Bangalore, when you're dealing with water, it used to be rural, it became peri-urban, and it's now urban, these traditional systems. And so therefore, that has to be integrated as part of the design. Now, it's an old history, and luckily for us, there are groups of people who are working on inscription stones, and these inscription stones tell us beautiful history of our water systems. So we've understood that the lakes, which we once thought were just about 300 to 500 years old, actually are 1,000 to 1,200 years old. And the ancients have carved it on rocks, granite and gneiss, and left it in the neighborhoods all over the place. These are being discovered by a very interested group of people. The beauty is that those rocks are 3,200 million years old. So we sit on a geology, and yesterday there was a very nice discussion on what geological time means. Bangalore sits on a geology which is 3,200 million years old, and that's one of the oldest rocks in the world, right? And that has created the water systems for us, which has been then modified by human beings, which is then captured in inscription stones. And so the way the old people worked with the technologies they had was to design something called a cylindra. A cylindra is a granite box, as you can see in the center, with a spout. No tap, you put in a spigot, a stick. Now, the right side is the top of the cylindra, where there was this hole in the granite, and community people would come from as far away as 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers just to simply fill in this water tank. And the water tank would be placed below the shade of a banyan tree and a neem tree. And beside the water tank would be a small granite step, where if you were carrying a head load, you put the head load on that, had a drink of water, rested in the shade of the tree, ate your lunch, then you put the head load back on your head without help of anybody else, right? Because head loads can be very heavy for travelers. And so that was the design sense with water as a community construct, a common pool resource, which you filled up not for any fiscal return, but because you wanted to do it for people, or you had an otherworldly return. So that's the water construct of the past. And the water construct of the past also came from the natural hydrology. The clouds coalesced around hillocks. It rained, water came down, and what you see is a water body which is human-made. That human-made water body is by throwing an earthen dam lined with stone, as you see in the figure on the right, across a valley. and holding onto the water, right? So all water tanks or lakes in my part of the world are all human-made. There's no natural lake. They're all human-made. They're called tanks. And the tank is special because it's above the ground. It's not below the ground as a scooped basin, but it's generally a wall across the valley, so it's above the ground. And it's above the ground for a purpose, because then you can take the water by gravity and feed the fields below, right? And so each one of the watersheds that you see here, you see many small streams, and each stream had a tank. And some of the British engineers who came, who started to recognize the presence of these tanks, said that you cannot build one more tank in this place, because the ancients have covered all the space that was available over 1,500 years with this tank ecosystem. So if you took a look at some of the districts which are close to Bangalore, 1/3 of that district would be blue in color if all the tanks were filled. So that was the extent of coverage of water resources in a semi-arid land. And a simple construct of a design of a tank included feeder channels which brought water to the tank, to the lake, an earthen dam, a sluice gate, and what's called a command area where irrigation would occur with the waters, right? And irrigation would be of a particular kind. There would be an overflow weir. The overflow weir would take the water to the next tank. And that's how it looked like. That's the overflow weir. And you see the overflow weir on the right side, it's brought down by a couple of inches because the construction of the overflow weir was not a decision of the village alone. It was a decision of a series of villages downstream. Because water from one tank would overflow to the next tank in the downstream village, and then it would go to the next one till it reached the river. So it was therefore a decision of dialogue between all of them before you arrived at the height of a water tank. So something that we forget. And there was the social and cultural aspect to it. These gentlemen on the left, Nirugantis, were responsible for the water distribution in the command area. They did not own land, but they were responsible for the water distribution to make sure that every field reached its required water, equitably distributed. And there was a float festival called Gangama. Whenever the tank overflowed, it would be celebrated in the village with people contributing a share of the festivities, a sheep, goat, etc., etc. But remember, it's a feudal construct. It looks beautiful, gorgeous. But water in a village only makes sense to those who own land. If you don't own land, water is of no use at all. Once the farmers who own land, if there's more water in the tank, can grow 2 crops or 3 crops, and they will benefit from it, but only about 10% of a village owns land, and the 90% are bereft of any value used for it. So water, if seen as an environmental or hydrological good, can actually create social inequities. So therefore, how do you bring justice, access to the process of water regeneration is a question that we've tried to answer within us. This water, as I said, would go down and paddy would be cultivated. Now there's a modern construct that paddy should be replaced with millets because paddy is water intensive, millets are less water intensive. But the land below the tank has been puddled with clay over centuries and cannot grow anything except paddy. It can only grow sugarcane at the worst. And so paddy cannot be replaced by millets. It can't be. That land can't replace it. And paddy is one of the greatest converters of water to virtual water. It takes water which is prone to evaporation. The sun is the biggest enemy of rain and water in our part of the world, tropical world. So quickly water has to be converted to food grains, and the food grains can then be stored over 3 years, right? So that's the conversion process, and paddy is one of the best converters. That's what occurred. And of course, the paddy construction is gendered, and it's more women who are working on it. And this has to be kept in mind when the rehabilitation of the tank occurs, right? These are essentially Dalit women who don't own land and who have particular patriarchies to deal with. But it's a gorgeous landscape. So 3 out of 10 years, you would have average rainfall and good rainfall, and you'd see the extent of paddy till the next tank. So you had a tank, paddy cultivation, next tank, paddy cultivation, and so on. That's how the land would go about. And so when the city came on this landscape, it started to occupy the valleys. And then it started to put disequilibrium into the system, and I'll come to that. But it's beautiful. You don't have to go to Bali. You can come to Kolar, Mudabagal and have a good look at it and take your selfies for Instagram. These channels are very important. These are what takes the water to the command area. These are called Raj Kalways in our language. It's very important that the modern imagination is to just desilage the tank and put water there. We don't think about its distribution efficiency. We don't invest enough in that. And what we learn from the women of the village and the farmers of the village is that you have to focus on this as much as anything else. Because the water has to be taken equitably, and it gently slopes. There's a landscape designed to all the water movement. takes water by gravity to every field, to the last field downstream. And when the paddy ripens, you get this field. So there's a seasonality to it, there's a color to it, there's a beauty to the landscape. 110 days, 120 days, you get beautiful paddy. You need dry land in this area too, because when the paddy is harvested, it has to be threshed. And when the threshing has to occur, you need non-wet land, preferably rocks. Plus, you note the groundwater. So once there's a good rain, you stock water in the tank and use it. Later on, you shore up the aquifers. You fill it up so that you can use that in years of distress or less rainfall. And so groundwater is crucial to us. Surface water and groundwater talk to each other. And therefore, this groundwater is a supplement to the water required for the paddy. And when summer comes, you use groundwater. And groundwater is something that we are now technically understanding. India is the world's largest user of groundwater. We use 250 cubic kilometers, just to give you a number. We use more than China and USA together, who are number 2 and 3. So we are a groundwater civilization. And as some of us would know, it dates to the Harappan civilization. Mohenjo-daro, every third house had a well, right? So 5,000-year-old history of groundwater use, and modern groundwater, we are the world's largest user of groundwater. And that's water oozing in, hitting the rock, coming into the wells, and the wells storing up the water, right? And the wells themselves became then aesthetic displays of architecture. Not the glorious step wells, but these are wells in the farmers' fields. These are, from an engineering perspective, done without a gram of lime or cement, right? That's the beautiful cantilevered steps and everything. And so these wells were great displays of architecture. Plus, in this day and age where piped water supply is reaching every household through what's the world's largest drinking water program called Har Ghar Nal Se Jal, where a tap is reaching every household and 55 liters is to be given to every household, which is a damn good project. Yet, if the pump fails, if the borewell fails, these community artifacts like the well in the tank will continue to give you resilient water and sustainable water. This is not part of the imagination of the government to ensure water security to villages. The only imagination is an engineering one which will take water to the taps. And silt was as welcome as water. The festival of Ganesha was actually a celebration of silt in the tank. So you take some silt and clay from the tank, make the clay idols, put it back into the waters, as we do with the Visarjan, and request him to come back in the form of silt next year. Because this was the most nutritious silt to be applied on the field, and this is what was the equilibrium cycle there. Now, in an urban area, the silt becomes a nuisance because you don't know what to do with it, you don't know where to take it, and therefore you keep desilting tanks and don't know where to deposit the silt, right? So, and of course, fodder, sheep and goat also depended on the tank. Now, when you recover the tank ecosystem, you have to keep in mind the kind of needs, that livelihoods that are tied to it, right? And so what we do in Biome is to work with groups of women who do the desilting of the tank, the entire tank ecosystem, right? You see the feeder channel being desilted now. It's all silted up, and there you clean it up. Led by women such as Asha from Arohana. She's our heroine. She mobilizes the community, talks and dialogues with them, mobilizes the women, and makes sure that the work is done and spreads the story, and keeps hammering away the need to keep maintenance going, right? So all these feeder channels and distribution channels are being cleared by these women, the Dalit women. Now, these Dalit women get about 550 rupees a day, 100 days wages, if possible, which is much more than the Employment Guarantee Act. So therefore, they have money to take home for spending on health, education, whatever they have to. So the process is as important as the product. They can all be replaced by excavation machinery and tractors, if so efficiency is our norm, and we can do the job within 10 days, but it takes 100 days for them. But then the process, as I said, is important that the villagers realize what is it that they're recreating, not just how it's getting recreated. So that's something that we work on, and one of the measures of our success is when the Song of the Paddy comes. So this has come back in 14 years, these Songs of the Paddy, and what we now do is to work with the well diggers and the women themselves to document their own story. So then we can perhaps give it off to Parry, right? But it's important that documentation occurs at the village level for the villagers themselves, not for an external audience which will then admire it in 15 languages. That also needs to be done, but we also need to make sure that it is remembered and sung in the village, yeah? Not as an artifact, but as a success story. So this is not a physical measure of success, but it's an intangible method of success. Now comes the city. The city becomes a scale, and density of the city becomes a disruptor, because when drought and famine comes, and this is non-climate change era, 1876 to 78, 90,000 people die in the city of Bangalore. When the population of Bangalore is 150,000, 150,000, 90,000 people die, 25% of the population of the old Mysore kingdom is wiped out by drought and famine. The old tanks are incapable of supporting dense populations in the city. They can support populations which are village-based, habitation-based, but not this. So therefore, then we move to technology. We use steam engines to bring water to our city 20 kilometers away, but these steam engines are firewood-based. And so therefore, they start to deplete the jungles and forests around as they feed into the system, right? And in the urban areas, the catchments now change because the quality of runoff changes. There's more sewage, there's more garbage, and the interconnectedness of the tanks are being disrupted by real estate prices being very high. This is a slide by Ayushi. However, in the city too, there are fissures. And if fissures are involved as part of the tank maintenance or lake maintenance, they make sure that the water hyacinth, which becomes a nuisance, is removed because it's their livelihood. If the tanks are free of water hyacinths, as you see in Powai Lake, then their fish catch is better, right? So therefore, they are to be the architect of any lake rehabilitation in the city. Plus, they provide proteins, and it's a livelihood for the cooperatives, yeah? So rehabilitation of a water body is through a livelihood-based process, which is crucial. It is not a hydrological or engineering process. And there are so many livelihoods tied to the water body. For example, the grass cutter who's cutting grass for feeding his cows, or this grass cutter here, or foragers who pick up vegetables for their kitchen gardens, right? So all these are part of a tank ecosystem which should be planned and included as part of design, system design, right? When we do system designs. And then the birds come. But these are different birds who come in. This one's come in from China and Siberia, painted storks and pelicans. And because there's water and fish inside the tank, because the fisherman is fishing, they become permanent residents of Bangalore. They have Aadhaar card, a local card, and they vote in the local elections, right? So now you welcome, it's a global city, not from a metropolitan and human basis, but also from a biodiversity and bird basis, right? So painted storks and pelicans. So this is the revival that one looks for. It's social, ecological, and then functional, because then the lakes recharge the groundwater, and this groundwater can be picked up and used for drinking water purposes, right? Mind you, the lake that I showed you gets treated wastewater also from sewage treatment plants. So sewage water is being converted to this water without the yuck factor, because people are happy to drink this water, but not from an STP, right? And then it's tied to the livelihoods of people, as Sainath was mentioning. We found the Manvadar community. This community has been digging wells and tanks all across India for 1,000 years or more. They're an itinerant community. They migrate from place to place. They dig tanks and wells. Most of the tanks, wells, and canals in India have been dug by this community. This community does not have a livelihood now because bore wells are being dug, which you great rains, right? But how do you get back the livelihoods? Can water security for a metropolis like Bangalore be assured by livelihoods and jobs for well diggers, not through large physical infrastructure, but this process? So what the well diggers do now is to dig what are called recharge wells, like the one in the center back, which takes rainwater and pushes it into the aquifer. These are small wells, 3 feet in diameter, 20 to 30 feet deep, takes filtered rooftop rainwater or water from stormwater drains, which is filtered and pushes it into the aquifer. The goal that the well diggers for them have set for themselves is 1 million wells for the city of Bangalore. So if you dig 1 million wells, they have livelihood for the next 5 to 7 years, and the city has water security, right? So that's one approach that we take, and we're lucky, I am lucky, particularly because I sit in policy platforms. So we made it mandatory for rainwater harvesting to occur in the city, which demanded a recharge well. So policy generates livelihoods, which generates water security. That's the sort of triangle that we think that cities can follow. And this program has now become a national program called the Shallow Aquifer Management Program, and is reaching out to 500 cities all across India, funded by the government of India through a program called Amrut, right? So scale, replicability, I don't want to say scale in front of John, but replicability as local as possible based on the context of that city or town, but facilitated and supported by the government of India. So for me, scale is replicability. Principles of replicability, which take into consideration local nuances and then respond to it, and then pick the ideas and make it replicable based on people available or water available or rain available or aquifers available. That's the way to go. And so this is the system as a whole, which is storage of rainwater and recharge of aquifers. It's a simple system to understand, and this is what we need to work on. And this is where design comes in, because there are now 40 different kinds of rainwater filters which are being designed all across India, which filters the rooftop rainwater and makes it better quality for it to be recharged into the aquifer. As is being shown, stormwaters are being redesigned, not to just barrel out the water outside the city, but to pick it and infiltrate it into the ground. Yeah? So these kind of designs have to come. And when you work at a community scale, like neighborhoods of 360 plots or 700 plots, what you do is to communitize water. You ban private borewells. There are only 3 or 4 community borewells which are sunk into the aquifer to draw the water out, but you make it mandatory for everybody to recharge. So instead of competitive drilling, you get cooperative filling. And the competitive drilling is when you drill a borewell 500 feet deep, I drill one next to you 600 feet deep, and the next one drills 800. So the first one goes dry, the second one goes dry. Net, there's a race to the bottom. So can we reverse the race to the bottom with a race to the top? Now what happens is when you dig recharge wells, people compete to build bigger recharge wells. So this community, for example, now depends on one borewell for all their water requirements, and they haven't had to get external tanker water at all, which is unusual for Bangalore, which went through a crisis. So we believe that water can be communitized, communities can work on it for sustainability and for climate resilience, right? So that's the example that takes place at a bit bigger scale. And at the heart of it are the well diggers, because they take their traditional knowledge, mix it with modern scientific knowledge, and then go about getting a job, digging recharge wells, cleaning old wells. We've cleaned up old wells which had been filled up with garbage over donkey's years and brought it back to life to supply non-potable water to the community surrounding. And this is the beauty of it all. In the conventional design, you cannot design water supply systems for anything but potable water. But the maximum requirement for water is non-potable. The potable water component is only about 5 liters, right? So we need to do that, so therefore we rehabilitate old wells like this. And in this well, the women taught us a lesson, because the women said, don't put a pump in it. If you put a pump in it, the water will go to the apartments, and the richer folks, the well will go dry. We will go to the water and haul it with pitchers, right? My colleagues were horrified because we had promised the CSR funding guys that we'd put a pump, and therefore CSR is corporate social responsibility funds, and they are pretty nasty people, or good people, depending on how you see it. But they learned, and we learned from the women, that actually ecological sustainability is living within the means of water. And the well is the greatest communicator of the availability of the resource. When you go to the well, it talks to you, tells you summer is approaching. Water levels are going down. Change your behavior, use less. When the rains come back, the water level comes up, use me more profligately, right? If I recharge the well, the water level is up, you're rewarded for good behavior. If you dump garbage around the well, it gets polluted, you're punished for your bad behavior. That communication signal, which is now lost in modern water supply systems, because the dam is far away and you don't have many pipes, is a big challenge for us. And therefore, these well diggers are reviving such wells with all garbage accumulated across decades, and they become functional, like the 3-tap well, and bring water. And the beauty is that private real estate developers also now recognize the value of the shallow aquifer. They protect the wells. They don't fill it up with soil and convert it to a flat or an apartment. Protect it, rejuvenate it. Heritage is protected, but heritage is protected functionally. And there's nothing like that. That's a 100-year-old step well which has been protected and now gives 1.1 million liters of water in a pumping cycle, the one there. And that's done by a really rich real estate developer. That's the sort of market link that we need to do, the community link that we need to do. The last story that I tell you is about a local town which is very close by where the international airport is. That's Sihinir Kere, Sweetwater Lake. That's the old fort of Devanalli 1501. The town struggles for water. It's put in 101 deep borewells which have gone 1,800 feet deep, and the water is saline. TDS, which is a measure of water, total dissolved solids, is more than 2,000 in some cases, which is really seawater, and it's very difficult to drink. So what do we do? Look at the farmer washing his feet. Behind him is Sihinir Kere. This is how it looked like. An NGO came in, and with the help of the town municipal council, cleaned up the lake, the tank. And this is how it looks like. And this is rainwater and treated wastewater, right? Treated wastewater from the city of Bangalore, which is coming in and filling it. And Ayushi is a great fan of this lake. Whenever she goes there, she takes these beautiful pictures. This picture is by her. She's got a lovely camera. That's the second excuse. It's not her as a photographer, it's the camera, but then we can also give her credit. But I just jest. And next to that, my colleague went in and rehabilitated an old well, which was being filled by the town municipal council with garbage and being leveled up. He intervened and he got it cleaned up. And that's how the well water looks like now, with fish and turtle inside it, right? And there's a safety guard on it. Then we put in place a water treatment plant, a state-of-the-art water treatment plant, a rapid sun filter, activated carbon filter, UV filtration, chlorination. And we supply the water to Devanalli town, India's first project of wastewater to drinking water, using the traditional tank ecosystem, the traditional well ecosystem, the well being cleaned by traditional well digging community, but bringing modern science into bear to make sure that it's absolutely done well. The best benefit, Look at the energy per kiloliter. In the era of climate change, the well has 0.25 units of energy. The deep bore wells are 1.79. So a factor of 8 in terms of energy reduction, carbon emissions, and therefore cost. The cost per kiloliter, 1,000 liters, is 1 rupee 23 paisa for treated water of drinking water standards, which if you put in a plastic bottle, it's about 20 rupees a liter, right? 20 rupees a liter. So here you're getting 1 rupee 23 paisa for 1,000 liters. Therefore, you're able to do social justice and get water to everybody, universal coverage. That's our dream. We're ratcheting up to phase 2 and phase 3. We hope to get to about 7 million liters per day. But it's not only about us. What we're doing is we're bringing the government, we're bringing everybody and anybody, showing them this and saying, hey, why don't you replicate it? And so the government is interested in replicating it. Private companies are interested in replicating it. So communication is key, and we're able to do that. And so I end my presentation with Ostrom's rules of the commons. And this is how water should be dealt with in terms of design, I think. Think about institutions, post social change as problem solving, embrace diversity, but be specific to that local context. Listen to people, listen to women, listen to farmers, listen to well diggers. Self-government is possible. Everything changes. Be prepared for a dynamic world. Map power, because power is what needs to be tweaked to get solutions rolling. Collective ownership can work. Human beings are part of nature too. So when you restore nature and lake for livelihoods, you restore it for nature and biodiversity itself, and you restore it for humans as a third in the step of hierarchy of restoration. All institutions are constructed, so need to be constructed differently. There are no panaceas. Complexity does not mean chaos. This is Ostrom. Thank you very much for your patience, because it's a piece of sky fallen into a well, and we don't see it till we want to go and see it, right? That piece of sky needs to be grabbed, and we need to begin a journey of water literacy, where we discuss all elements of water, especially with our younger ones, so that the message becomes broad-based. Thank you for your time and patience, and I'm happy.